Good morning, geniuses. Brannon at Brannon Sax here with another video of tips and suggestions to help improve your playing. In previous videos, I've covered topics like practice routine and sight reading, and I may have mentioned subdivision once or twice. In this week's video, I'd like to go more in depth about subdivision, what it is, what it means, and how to do it. Subdivision is how we separate music by rhythm. We divide music into measures and beats and then subdivide those measures into rhythms. For most of this discussion, I will default to a 4/4 time signature, so if you're working in 3/2, 6/8, or any other time signature, my instructions may need to be adjusted accordingly. In 4/4, we assign one beat to a quarter note. That means a whole note represents a whole measure. Therefore, a half note would be a half of a measure, and a quarter note would be a quarter of a measure. For those that don't speak fractions, a whole note is 4 beats, a half note is 2 beats, and a quarter note is 1 beat. Now, what do we do with rhythms shorter than a quarter note? We subdivide. Let's look at notes subdivided. Whole note, 4 beats or 1 whole measure. Half note, 2 beats or half of a measure, 2 per measure. Quarter note, 1 beat or a quarter of a measure, 4 per measure. Eighth note, half of a beat, 8 per measure. 16th note, a quarter of a beat, half of an eighth note, or 16 per measure. 32nd note, an eighth of a beat, half of a 16th note, or 32 per measure. Those are all examples of duplet subdivisions. Duplet means divisible by 2. There are also tuplet subdivisions, which are irregular subdivisions and are not divisible by 2. Tuplet rhythms can be any duration but represent a different number of notes where you would normally fit 2 notes. For example, quarter note triplets would be 3 quarter notes played evenly across 2 beats, in 4/4 where you would normally see 2 quarter notes. Triplets, quintuplets, sextuplets, and septuplets are all examples of tuplet rhythms. A quadruplet would be a set of 4 notes like 16th notes, and an octuplet would be a set of 8 notes. Before I play, I make sure to look over a piece of music to determine what kinds of subdivision I might see. I use syllables to help internalize rhythmic subdivision, much like we use letters to identify pitch variations. Whole note. We count 1, 2, 3, 4, and off on 1. Half note. We count 1, 2, off on 3, 3, 4, off on 1. Quarter note. 1, 2, 3, 4. Eighth note. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. 16th note. 1E and 2E and 3E and 4E and There is no definitive universal symbol for 32nd notes, but I use 1 da ida and da ada, 2 da ida and da ada, 3 da ida and da ada, 4 da ida and da ada. Some people use a more distinct ta syllable, 1 ta, e ta, and ta, a ta, or differentiate the notes after 1 and with the notes after e and a. 1 d, e, da, and d, a, da. Any of those would be correct. Triplets are another rhythm with no definitive universal syllable. Similar to using e and a pattern, we could say 1e, 2e, 3e, 4e, but that could get confusing when there are triplets along with 16th and 8th, 16th patterns. I prefer attaching the suffix palet to each triplet for subdivision. 1 palet, 2 palet, 3 palet, 4 palet. But you may find other syllables work better for you. Some use lolly, 1 lolly, 2 lolly, 3 lolly, 4 lolly. My best advice is to find a system that works for you. For tuplet rhythms beyond groups of 4, I try to find a word that has the same number of syllables, like a mnemonic that I can remember quickly. You can use any word you like, but these are what I use. Quintuplets, hippopotamus, 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 hippopotamus. Sextuplets I see as two sets of triplets, triplet, triplet. Triplet, 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 triplet. Septuplets I use autobiographical. Autobiographical, 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 autobiographical. That one's kind of hard. Octuplets I can either do as two sets of 16th notes or one word autobiographically. 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 Nonuplets would be three sets of triplets. Triplet, 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 triplet. As we discuss subdivision, that leads us to the discussion of syncopation. Syncopation is where notes are displaced from the beat and land on the off beat. For example, a syncopated rhythm could be four quarter notes that start on the second eighth note of the measure, typically written as eighth notes tied together. Some syncopated rhythms could simply put emphasis on a part of the measure other than the traditional strong beats in the pattern 1, 2, 3, 4. Jazz, rock and roll, blues, and R&B styles of music, among others, make lots of use of syncopation. Let's look at some examples of how to count syncopated rhythms. Dotted quarter notes. 1, an implied 2, and 3, an implied 4, and 1. 1, and 3, and 1. Offbeat eighth notes. An implied 1, and an implied 2, and an implied 3, and an implied 4, and. Dotted eighth 16th note pattern. 1, an implied E and A 2, an implied E and A 3, an implied E and A 4, an implied E and A 1. 1, a 2, a 3, a 4. 16th, 8th, 16th note pattern. 1, E, an implied and, a 2, E, an implied and, a 3, E, an implied and, a 4, E, an implied and, a 1. 1, E, a 2, E, a 3, E, a 4, E, a 1. There are others, but those are a few examples of how to count syncopated rhythms. Subdividing rhythms and counting syncopation can help improve your sight reading skills and make learning new pieces of music much faster and easier. Hopefully this video has given you a starting point to jump into practicing counting rhythms. As always, if you have any questions or would like to discuss private lessons online via Zoom or Skype, please email me at the address below. If you have any suggestions for future topics of discussion, you may use that email address as well or leave a comment below. Please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel to be alerted when new videos with more tips and advice are available. Stay tuned.